Okay, if we could get our seats. We have exactly 90 more minutes, so I want to try to get through all this. You all have been amazing, and I appreciate your attentiveness. I want to get us done on time, and I've got a flight, so we're going to get done on time. Okay, everybody can start to take their seats. While people are still walking back in, just a couple comments. One of the comments I heard, the judge talked about contracts and getting the right contracts done. One of the things that we're finding, which is a really interesting problem, is the insurance industry. Parity is on the books, but it's not really applied. And a lot of times insurance companies that are getting, that companies are hiring to do even mental health work, they're not using providers that use evidence-based practices. And so the American Psychiatric Association actually has an entire program on how to get the right insurance. Because what we're finding happens is when people in the community that have insurance don't have the right insurance, they end up in the public system that's already under-resourced and overburdened, and then often in the criminal justice system. So moving on the front end of all this, there's a lot we need to learn, unfortunately, which makes everything so complicated because it's pretty much outside of our wheelhouse. When you're starting to think about putting those systems together, one of the pieces is to make sure that the insurance companies are doing their job, and when private companies are hiring, are getting insurance for their employees, and make sure they have the right insurance and the right provider in the insurance pool to make sure the person's getting what they need. Last year, the economic impact of untreated depression in the United States was $200 billion. $200 billion. And so even companies that have insurance, what happens is if they're not getting the person the right type or the good treatment, they may not recover, and then they start blaming the individual when in fact it turns out the individual isn't getting quality care. And so there's a lot of pieces to this. And so one of the ways to do that is we've teamed up with our local Chamber of Commerce, which is a great partner for you, by the way, when you're looking for resources. And this affects them on many different levels. One is absenteeism and presenteeism, as we call it, for people that have depression, that are working in companies that aren't doing their job, or they have family members with mental health issues or substance use issues and aren't able to spend the kind of time at work they need to be spending. So there's an economic interest that businesses have. They don't like seeing a lot of homeless people outside their businesses, particularly in the urban centers. And so what we did is we put on a whole training program with our Chamber of Commerce. They brought all of the big businesses in, and we brought representatives in from the American Psychiatric Association and others to help teach them on what insurance to even get. So these are other pieces that makes for great partners and also may help you with some resources. So let's get back on track. We're going to talk a little bit about the role of the judge to have an effective response. When we had the little question and answer area about scenarios that you have seen, and one of them is, a person laughing uncontrollably, or the individual that wouldn't sit down, and once he sat down, he wouldn't get back up. So we're going to talk a little bit about maybe some strategies that you can use to get some better responses. Okay. So how do we identify that mental illness may be a factor in your courtroom? And it sounds common sense, but if you're not looking for it, you're not going to spot it. So you want to make certain observations: appearances, cognition, attitude, affect, speech. Look, if it's 100 degrees in the summer in Georgia and the person comes to court with 6 coats on, your radar needs to go off, okay? Or if it's cold out and they're barely dressed, your radar needs to go off. Just don't get annoyed that they're not being respectfully dressed before something else might be going on. Other issues. We already went through trauma, but it's very, very serious. I had a case not too long ago. We had this woman, she was young, serious mental illness. You can almost assume that there's a history of trauma. The state was offering her credit time served on a misdemeanor. I wanted her to go into our diversion program because she was so sick. And one of the things that I do when I talk to people in court that have mental illnesses is the first thing I do, and I think this is really important, is I ask them, do you mind if I ask you any personal questions? You're in an open court, you're on a public record. It would be like asking somebody, how's your breast cancer today? You wouldn't do that, okay? And you shouldn't think about doing that for people with these illnesses. And so when you do that, you start to get respect from the individual, and you start to develop a relationship and some bonding which you're going to need because you want them to listen to you. Once I get a response, do you mind? And if they hesitate, the next question I ask them is, would you be more comfortable coming up to the bench and talking outside of the presence of everybody in the courtroom? And I usually am dealing with people that are still in custody, so my corrections officers always cringe a little bit, but I've never had a problem. They bring them up to the bench. Of course, I have both parties there. This is not an ex parte communication, but it makes it easier for them to talk. And so I brought this woman up, and we started talking, and one of the key words or phrases that I've learned to use, and I learned this from someone with lived experience, she had this woman that taught me this, she had a really horrible history of sexual abuse, and she said whenever she'd get arrested, the first thing the judges would always say to her is, what's wrong with you? Well, when someone says that to you, how do you think you're going to respond? She said, never did a judge ask me, is there anything I can do to help? And so the first question I now ask, once I get past the whole privacy issue, is what can I do to help? Is there anything we can do to help you? And you will be amazed at the different response to you immediately from the individual. So we ended up having this very intense conversation, and I said, look, I understand that most women who are in jail with mental illnesses have really horrible histories, and sometimes horrible histories of sexual abuse and violence. She broke down crying. She told me that when she was 5 years old, she had her first sexual assault at a bar where her mother had taken her. And, you know, it was horrifying, but at the same time, I was probably the first person she ever told that to. She didn't tell her psychiatrist, she didn't tell her doctor. She ended up having to tell the judge because I was the first person that probably asked the right way. Well, as a result of the conversation I had with her, she agreed to go into the program. She had a child, so she asked if she could go home first and do some other stuff. We had a long talk. Everybody in the courtroom bet me she wouldn't come back. I had nothing to lose since they had offered her credit time served, so I didn't really want to hold her longer for this bed to open up. And sure enough, the next morning at 9 o'clock, she showed up with a garbage full of all of her belongings, and she was ready to go to a program, and she's done incredibly well. And so you just don't know. And part of it is how we talk to people in terms of what kind of response we're going to get. So a history of trauma is critical, and you can also assume, I don't know if we put it up yet, but about 75 to 80% of the people in your jail with various mental illnesses are co-occurring, meaning they have a substance use addiction on top of their mental health issue. We've talked about a lot of these other issues. About 50% of the people in jail with mental illnesses also are homeless at the time of arrest. Very few of them are employed, and most of them lack transportation. So when you start bringing people back to court a million times, this is what often gets them in trouble if they don't have other alternatives to get to you. So you want to get the right information. And I'm going to pass these 3 little books around. Judge Goss actually, Judge Bethel helped us develop these. They both are part of the Judges Psychiatric Leadership Initiative. These are my last 3 copies, so please don't walk away with them. They're only $5, but so it's a misdemeanor if you do. But, to me, they're worth a lot more than that. So anyway, I'm going to pass them around. One of them is called the Judge's Guide. Let me stand here to Mental Health Jargon. And so when I talk about getting the right information, this is a wonderful little book to have on your bench. We developed this with federal dollars, so we cannot make any money off of it. So they're very inexpensive, although they're very valuable. The second one we did, and there's been a lot of discussion, and by the way, before I go further, I'd be remiss not to add, I was so impressed with the judges that spoke here from Georgia today, and what you all are doing and how you're doing it the right way. It just is so heartwarming for us to hear all these great things going on in other communities, so thank you for what you're doing. But we've actually developed one called Judge's Guide to Mental Health Diversion. And this helps you, when the judge was talking earlier about who we had at the table, you know, all that is in here. And so you could have written this, thank you very much. And you know, it really makes it easier if you're going to do these kinds of summits or convening, who you need at the table is all in here. And then we did another one called the Judge's Guide to Juvenile Mental Health Jargon, because it does get different on diagnoses and medication. And the beauty of the jargon book is it lists all the different medications that these individuals may be taking and what those medications are for. So when somebody comes in and they say they're on Seroquel, you'll immediately know that it's probably bipolar diagnosis, and you can figure out what's going on. So let's pass these around if you don't mind. There's order information in here.
There's also, I think, in the list of resources that
So,
you got, I believe I included the order form.
Yeah, there should be an order form, and there's a phone number and an email address in here that you can, actually, you can pass this around. Just keep it moving and we'll get them when we're finished. We talked a lot about the criminogenic risk and need. So I thought what we do is, because you all have been patient and listening, let's get a little bit more interactive. Judge Goss is going to help me out with this, and maybe Dr. Vincent. We produced, with a PBS producer, a series of videos for judges. And they're really wonderfully done. And it just gives you an idea of, I want you to look at these, look at what you think the judge did well, what you think the judge did poorly, and we'll talk about how we can improve some of our behaviors. They're embedded, right? Yes.
This is a bond hearing for Ms. Rodriguez, a veteran of the United States Army recently returned from Afghanistan. Ms. Rodriguez faces a felony charge for aggravated battery to a police officer. Bond has already been set at $3,500 or 10%.
Barely slept since I got back. I have nightmares and I keep. Leave me alone. Just relax. Yeah. Okay. That's okay. All right. Yeah.
And hello to the councils. Are you ready to proceed this afternoon?
Yes,
Your Honor.
And would you enter your appearances for the record, please?
Wayne McKenzie on behalf of the state.
Grace Kendrick for the defendant.
And this is Ms. Rodriguez.
Yes, it is.
And this is on your application for reconsideration of the bail that was previously set by this court. You may proceed.
At this time, I'm asking if Your Honor would consider releasing my client on her own recognizance, otherwise setting a reasonable bond. My client has just been discharged from the Army. She was honorably discharged. She served in Afghanistan. Your Honor, she's currently homeless, but she does live in a nearby shelter. Her mother lives in the city and nearby, and although she's not working hard, she has a savings account, so she is able to make a small amount of bond. So I would ask, given all of that you would consider releasing her on her own account or setting a reasonable amount of bond.
In counsel, the position of the state.
If I may inquire briefly?
Yes.
Ms. Rodriguez, isn't it true that before entering the service you moved 4 different times?
Yeah, so?
And during that same period, one of those times you moved out of the county?
So what? Does it matter?
The state opposes the release of this defendant on a recognizance bond. Your Honor, we further oppose any reduction in the bond based on the serious nature of this crime and the defendant being a flight risk.
Counsel, Ms. Kendrick, I would like to also ask a few questions of your client, Ms. Rodriguez.
That's okay.
And you also were deployed?
Yes, sir. Deployed to Afghanistan.
Is that right? Well, I want to thank you very much for your service to this country. And where were you in boot camp?
Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Yes. And what was your MOS?
I was an MP. Sorry.
And where were you eventually stationed, stateside, that is?
Fort Irving in California.
At the National Training Center?
Yes, sir.
Is that right? How long have you been back home from Afghanistan?
About 3 or 4 months.
Okay. Well, we're glad you're back home, but I also see that you're going through some recent challenges. You mentioned about having difficulty sleeping.
Yes, sir.
Do you also have nightmares?
Yes, sir, I do. Yes, Your Honor.
And since your return, have you had the opportunity to have an examination done?
No, sir, I have not.
Have you had any form, even prior to your return home, while you were in Afghanistan, any type of examination done for post-traumatic stress disorder,
No, sir.
traumatic TBI, any
No,
other
Your
forms
Honor.
of trauma?
No, sir.
Have you talked to a doctor or medical staff?
No, sir.
There is a representative here from the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. The position was created to actually help and work with veterans such as yourself. The title was given of a Veterans Justice Outreach Worker. I'm going to want that person to actually speak with you and work with you and have a full examination done. To both counsels, counsel on behalf of the state, and also Ms. Kendrick on behalf of your client, Ms. Rodriguez. I do understand your bail application. I also understand the concerns of the state because the court does realize these are serious charges involving a law enforcement officer. I would like to reserve on your application for reconsideration of bond, have a full examination done, allow Ms. Rodriguez to be released strictly and solely to the representative from the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, Veterans Justice Outreach Worker, for a full assessment to be done and completed at our VA hospital facility. Upon the full examination, she'll be then returned back to custody, and the court will then reconsider your application for reduction or modification of bond. I would like to adjourn it for a period of 1 week on behalf of the state. Is that agreeable, sir?
The state would consent to the defendant's release for the purposes of the evaluation.
And with respect to Ms. Kendrick and Ms. Rodriguez, is that agreeable?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
Ms. Rodriguez, you understand what we're going to do?
Yes, sir.
All right. And we're looking forward to, one, having a full assessment done. That, of course, will give this court a better idea on how best to proceed. And in addition, to also work to ensure that you receive the appropriate care and treatment. In addition, it would also assist the state with respect to its concern with regards to public safety and also your return back for your court proceedings. That being the case, this matter is hereby adjourned.
Thank you very much.
So the judge presiding is Judge Russell, if you don't know him. He started the first, he started the first Veterans Court in the United States in Buffalo. He's just like that. He's just a wonderful, kind human being, and we all have a lot to learn from him in a lot of ways. Do you have veterans courts in Georgia? Okay. How many of you are not familiar with a VJO? Everybody know what a VJO is? Veteran Justice Outreach Worker? Excellent. Okay. So we do training for them as well. So if you're having any difficulties accessing them, let us know or call your local VA, and they should be able to assist with that. Just a couple real quick facts. 38% of soldiers coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq have reported serious psychological symptoms, and that breaks down to 31% of Marines and 49% of National Guard returning. So it's a very, very serious issue. Any other suggestions that you think could have been done differently or better in that video? How about appointing a military peer or a mentor? A possible alternative, particularly for the individual. Any noticeable symptoms to you that would make you think that she might have some kind of mental health issue while she's standing there? She's jittery, she talks quick, her eye contact's all over the place, certainly showing signs of PTSD or trauma. So those are kind of things to pick up on. You know, again, don't get so offended when she's kind of barking back at you. It's probably a reaction to her own stress issues. Okay. I think this one's pretty straightforward, and Judge Russell does a wonderful job. Okay, this is a really interesting video. These were all produced in New York and the Brooklyn court. The two lawyers are real assistant prosecutors and public defenders and assisted us with these videos as well. And we had real actors performing for us as the defendants.
Mr. Johnson is facing a charge of indecent exposure due to public urination and intends to plead guilty today. He has 2 prior convictions for the same charge. Mr. Johnson has been adjudicated competent to proceed.
So we're on for a plea today, is that right?
Oh, that's correct.
Yes, sir.
Could I have your appearances, please, counsel?
Wayne McKenzie for the state.
Joyce Kendrick for the defendant.
Mr. McKenzie, what are the terms of the plea?
Your Honor, in exchange for a plea of guilty, promises 18 months on probation. Defendant is to participate in the LSIR assessment and readiness for change assessment administered by the Department of Probation. Defendant is to participate in the Resource Information Center program.
You look good enough, you do the same thing. Yeah, I doubt it. You gotta be quiet.
And if recommended by probation, any counseling services. Defendant is to have no contact with Tompkins Square Park, where this incident occurred. He's to obtain his GED within 1 year, and also there's a fine of $200. As Mr. Johnson has no assets and is unemployed, the state consents to the waiver of the $200 in court fees.
Ms. Kendrick, does your client understand the terms of the plea?
Yes, Your Honor.
Sir, I need you to be quiet. I'm talking. Do you have an application?
Yes, I do, Your Honor. At this time, Mr. Johnson has authorized me to withdraw any previously entered pleas of not guilty and enter a plea of guilty to indecent exposure for public urination in full satisfaction of the charges.
What's your name? What's your name? Can you stand still? Do you know your name?
Bob Johnson.
Do you understand what your lawyer just said to me? You have to listen to my questions. Do you understand that you're pleading guilty now?
Yeah.
Are you guilty?
Yeah.
Well, your lawyer said you were. Okay, so now you understand you're giving up your right to a trial, you're giving up your right to confront the witnesses against you, you're giving up your right to testify in the trial. Do you understand all that?
I just want to go home.
Yeah, okay, I'm sure you do. Does he understand everything, Ms. Kendrick?
Yes, he does, Your Honor.
All right, then I'll accept the plea. All right, I'm done with you.
Judge Goss, Dr. Hudson, if you want to help in any of this, please feel free. Okay, just a quick factual point. 95% of the convictions in this country are done through a plea. Very few people go to trial. Okay? And so these are more important than we realize. So there's a million issues in this case. And I have to add, because they made me act like a bad judge in one of the videos which we're not showing today.
It's not
They only show it when I'm not teaching and someone else is teaching. Judge Demick's wonderful. He's a really sweet man, and this was not easy for him to have to do either. So we had to coerce him to play the bad judge. All right. First question: how many people think this guy's even competent to proceed? I mean, how many people think he's competent? Anybody think he's competent? Right. There's enough there that it should have even at least been an inquiry. Now, in Miami, I would not bother on that. I would just straight divert him right out of the system. I mean, 18 months probation. How many people think this guy's going to make it a day? He's not even going to be able to get to his probation officer. Think about it. So he's gonna violate before he leaves the place, and will be back in jail probably as soon as the warrant is processed.
Wow.
All right? What other steps do you think this judge might have been able to take on a case like this? Criminogenic risk assessment, I mean, what other ideas? I know you're getting tired, beaten, blood sugar's down, so you gotta work with me. We just have another less than about an hour. Okay, any suggestions? All right, I think it's pretty obvious, okay? And it's easy to sit and criticize another judge, but sometimes we're a little tired and grumpy, and some of the defendants can be a little rough for us. And so just keep it in mind that you don't want to be that judge on that bad day you're having. And there's, you know, I guess the ultimate issue is, what outcome do you want? You know this is a setup for failure, and you know this is a setup for a rearrest relatively quickly. And even his tone and attitude towards him, if the guy has any history of trauma, isn't going to help. I'm done with you.
Right.
I mean, like, you know, he's a piece of garbage, you know? Just take him out and get rid of him. So I think we all realize that we all have had our bad days, but we should really strive not to do that. Does everybody know what the LSIR is? Judge Goss mentioned it. Anyone not know what it is? I'll be happy to. Okay. So it's a risk and needs assessment. There's several of them out there. We use one called the Ohio Risk Assessment System. It's an evaluation, it's an assessment to determine, you know, that complicated chart we showed, low risk, high risk, low need, high need. It figures out where they fall out on that scale and gives them a number basically. And then it gives you the information to help make a more informed decision. And what we talked about is, if he had come out as a low risk, low need, which I don't think he would have, to me he probably had high need and high criminogenic risk, not really dangerous, but probably the homeless, quality of life type offenses. That's the kind of person you probably want in a mental health court, that, you know, you can help get him navigate services. One of the things that I didn't talk about, I don't know if it's coming up or not, but I'll throw it in here real quick. One of the other pieces that we do, you and I are both from states that did not expand Medicaid. And so we have limited dollars. So one of the things that we do very effectively in Miami-Dade is we use a program called SOAR, which stands for Social Security Outreach. It's an assessment. It's a way to expedite federal benefits. And it's something you want to do particularly for this population, because if you can get them their federal benefits, then you can help them get treatment and medication and housing, because you also help them get on SSI. It's phenomenal, and I'll tell you why. The normal average time it takes to get somebody a federal benefit is usually 6 to 9 months. And if you're lucky, 30% qualify after you've gone through the process. We're able to get through our SOAR program, about 90% of the individuals qualified within about 40 days. And so one of the other cool things about being a judge, we talked about people come to your meetings, they also return your call. So one of the things that we did when we started our program is I called the head of my local Social Security office. And they were actually thrilled to hear from us. They actually want people to get benefits that qualify. So they actually dedicated a full-time person to our team to help us process the Social Security and Medicaid benefits. And so once you do that, it helps you get their benefits quicker, and it helps you get them services. Because, you know, you get an individual like this, it's kind of hard to get him help if he doesn't have any insurance or any benefits. Yes, sir.
Judge, it's still the case that if you're in custody for more than 30 days, your benefits will be suspended?
Yes, and we're working on changing that federally. So the question is, do your benefits get terminated or suspended? And there's a difference between terminated and suspended. Suspended, and each state does it differently. We're trying to make sure my state only does a suspension, not a termination. If you're suspended, you can get the benefit back on relatively quickly. If you're terminated, you have to begin the process all over again, which could take months. Most recidivism occurs in the first 30 days of a release. And so if you don't have a plan put into place for an individual with mental illnesses, chances are they're going to reoffend quickly. And so you need these benefits. We begin this process of SOAR. We have a team that works for the court that gets paid for by our managing entity to do this SOAR program. And we start it the day they get arrested. And that way, you know, by the time they're out of jail, everything is almost set and the benefits are ready to kick in. And so if you want more information, Policy Research Association, PRA, which does the sequential intercept model, also does a program on SOAR, SOAR, so you can Google them and look up SOAR and learn how to expedite your benefits. Okay. So when you're, you know, our initial old reaction was order an evaluation, find out if they're competent. We don't want that in my program so much. I want more information, different kind of information. So we talk to our behavioral health colleague. It's usually a psychiatrist or psychologist that's doing the evaluation. And if we're getting an evaluation, we're not asking for competency so much. I'm more interested in knowing about what illness, what treatment, and those kinds of factors. So, you know, reach out, talk to them. Dr. Vincent said it's often hard for the doctor. A lot of people feel intimidated by our system. We've been doing it a long time. We're not that intimidated by our own system, but other people are. So you want to try to also be a little warmer and welcoming to the other folks that we need to help us fix some of these issues. These are just common sense. You know, you want to engage, you know, in dialogue with the assessor, what you're looking for. There are different kinds of assessment, have them explain to you what those are and what's going to work for you.
Can I ask something really quick?
Yes, please.
It's helpful for us as evaluators to know what you're trying to use the report to do. So I had a situation where the judge said, I want a psychosocial, a psychiatric, and a psychosexual. And I was like, well, why? Well, I want to know their history, I want a diagnosis, and I want to know about their psychosexual history. I'm like, well, what are you doing with it? We're trying to do a risk assessment to see if we can release this kid. I can do all that in a psychosexual evaluation that I do, right? But if she had gotten those 3 reports, they would have spent a lot of money and it still probably wouldn't have answered the question that she was actually trying to answer. So just make sure that your evaluator, before you spend all that time paying them to do it, understands what you're going to use the report for so that they can ask the right questions.
Yes, sir. There's a question.
The situation here in State Court in Houston County, we get somebody who obviously has major mental health issues. They're on a misdemeanor charge, something similar to what we had in the video. Then sometimes they've been in for several weeks before the defense attorney decides to file for a mental evaluation. We set them up for a mental health evaluation. The backlog is such that sometimes it takes a month or 2 before they get
Savannah was 301 days before the evaluation was
yeah.
even identified.
So then I give them a bond because I don't want them sitting in jail because they're waiting to be evaluated. And then they get a date to show up, and of course they don't make their date.
Of course not.
Then we have
They
to
show
be
up.
arrested and the cycle continues.
So that's why we divert within 3 days. And what I found really interesting that was discussed, I think in Fulton County and Savannah, they're changing the evaluation, the assessment tool at the jail. So you want to bring in all the different players. And one of the really good assessment tools was done by Dr. Stedman and Dr. Osher, and it's called the short jail. It's actually called the short jail screening tool. And you can go online. It's in the public domain, so it's free. And it's designed to be used by corrections personnel. You don't need a psychiatrist or a doctor or professional to do it. And it helps identify about 30% more of the folks that they're missing probably now. And you want to start to use tools like that and figure out a diversion system. Are you in a rural community?
160,000.
Okay. So do you have a facility you could send someone to if they did meet criteria?
No.
Okay, so, well, then one of the solutions we didn't really talk about much is telepsychiatry. And so what you might be able to do is set up over at the local hospital a room where you can have a psychiatrist by, you know, TV or Skype and have an assessment done there, and then they can prescribe, and then the hospital can give the medication there. So those are the kinds of things you want to do, is to sit down, because that's such a waste of resources for you. Not really good for the individual because they're not getting treated. It's killing the county budget and the jail, and the person's just going to recycle. I don't order any evals anymore. It just, until and unless they refuse everything and we've gone through everything to divert them. And so, and that's a last resort, and you can shrink down the use of the evaluations by about 80–90% by setting up a diversion system. And so you want to get it done at the jail first, see if you can have the jail transport to wherever you're going to need them to go, see if you can get them committed if needed be, or at least get them on the cycle, and then have them come right back to court to you after they leave the hospital, and then set up a plan for them and go from there. Yes, ma'am.
How did you get your prosecutor to agree to that?
It's a great question, and that was asked to me earlier. We started really slow, and I'm an elected prosecutor just like everybody. She was very nervous about doing this. There's a huge misconception among prosecutors that this is a very violent population. They're not. They're always worried that somebody that we release is going to go out and do something horrific and they're going to lose their job in an election over it. So we started by just doing non-violent misdemeanor cases. And she was okay to try that. And it was just done almost on a pilot basis. And within 2 years, the recidivism dropped like a rock. And instead of thinking that they're dangerous, she started to realize that this is really the way to improve public safety. Because this population is leaving anyway. You can't hold people indefinitely on misdemeanors anyway, so they're going to get out. And so the question to the prosecutor is simple. Do you release them with treatment or without treatment? And when they realize with treatment improves public safety, it's going to be good for them, they're going to start to do it. I'm very encouraged. This last year, we have finally kind of cracked the door open a little bit with the Prosecutors Association. There's 2 national associations, of course, one's liberal, one's conservative, the times we live in. But the more conservative association is the National District Attorneys Association, NDAA, and they had their first mental health training in South Carolina this year, and we're going to be doing a major training for them at their national conference this summer. So they are finally coming around, but it's an education process, and I would say start small, educate them. Just start with nonviolent misdemeanors. That's, your homeless person that's just recycling that this judge just mentioned, and set up a little diversion program for them and see how it works. And you'll be amazed. And then they'll start to buy in. But the other part of it is you want to see if you can stop them from being arrested to begin with. And that's where the CIT and the police program are so important. And that's why I find that doing some kind of summit, and we're going to talk about sequential intercept in a second, is the way to go, because when you get everybody in the room, they kind of feel guilty that they have to do something when other people start to do something. So everybody starts to step up, and I think that's a really important way to do it. We talk a lot about risk and responsivity, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it again, but again, it's very, very important, and I really encourage you to use that as a tool. And think about your impact on this individual in the way that you're making a ruling. I mean, are they going to decompensate? 1 day in jail for someone with... Look, drug courts and mental health are very different. I am totally fine with taking somebody that is in a drug court, that has, they've come back where they're under the influence, or we do a test and there's drugs in their system, putting them back in jail for a period of time. It's therapeutic jurisprudence. But that doesn't really work with people with serious mental illnesses. The chances of them decompensating is very high. A day in jail for this population can be very, very difficult. If they have housing, the chances are they're going to lose it. If they have employment, the chances are they're going to lose it. And the chances of them getting it back are very, very low. Also remember, people with mental illnesses have a much higher risk of suicide. So in custody, it's dangerous sometimes, and you want to think about that before you make that decision. What was mentioned earlier, people lose their benefits when they go into custody, and it makes it harder for them to have any continuity of care, and there are other losses of it, like I mentioned, employment and housing. Okay. You should have this in your package. I'll send these around if need be. This is a really, what I would suggest you do is you make a copy of it in your package and you laminate it, and leave it on the bench. This is one of the other tools that we designed from the Judges Psychiatric Leadership Initiative. It's called the Judge's Guide to Mental Illness in the Courtroom. It gives you a list of all the different observations that you may be making, and then more importantly, shows you what kind of interaction you might want to have with these individuals at the time. So, one page, two-sided. It's a really great guide to leave on the bench. So it's really critical to try to avoid aggravating the situation. And so one of the things that we do locally in Miami is we make sure we do training, not just of the judges, but of the all the court personnel, the bailiff, the public defender, the state attorney, the corrections officers. Often we'll pass these cases to the end of the calendar. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I find it really helpful to ask if they mind if you ask a personal question. This is really personal stuff. We shouldn't be cavalier about it. And I think showing a little respect in this issue is going to get you better responses. The other thing that might be helpful, if you're finding that they're not communicating with you well and you've tried just about everything, sometimes their defense attorney may have better luck. If there's a peer, what we do sometimes, we have 8 peers in our system. I may pass a case and call upstairs and ask for one of our peers to come down and have them talk to the individual. If there's a family member there, sometimes that helps as well. Your attitude. It's just really important to stay as calm as you can. This is what we teach the police also in CIT training. If you remain calm, they're going to remain calm. If you get annoyed and you respond to the way that they're reacting, like I have a 15-year-old kid. His frontal lobe isn't connected yet. He's 16 actually. It should be happening sooner than later. How many more years do I have of this? Yeah. Oh God. So, best advice my doctor gave me with my kid was when he spouts off something mad and stupid, don't react. Okay? Because when you do, they're testing you and it's going to escalate. It's the same thing with people with mental illnesses. Okay? Don't react. I've been cursed out by the best people with mental illnesses in my courtroom. It's okay. And when they come back in recovery, they are so embarrassed and so apologetic and so appreciative that I didn't overreact, you would be amazed. Okay? Holding them in contempt and giving them 6 extra months because they cursed you out in a psychotic episode accomplishes very little. Okay? So try to keep your calm, be patient, clearly enunciate, speak slowly, don't be condescending, treat adults like adults. And remember, fear and anxiety, maybe causing their reaction to you. So you want to try to avoid that. I love this last line, time spent getting this right is time spent later. It's so much better to spend 10 extra minutes at the front end than have this case go on forever because you overreacted. Pass the case to the end of the docket. Make sure it's quiet and calm. Ask the person if they mind you asking issues. What can I do to help? You will be shocked at the response you're going to get. Your words. No jargon. We use it all the time. I was listening to some of your jargon here. I had no idea what you were talking about. How do you think someone with mental illness feels? It's like, they're in a foreign country when you start using that language. So try not to use the jargon that we all use. Explain to them what's going on. Okay? That's going to help calm them down as well. They're scared. They don't know what's going on. Hey, this is just what we call an arraignment. This is the time in which the state is going to decide if they're going to charge you or not. This is, what may happen. If you're going to be releasing people and they have to come back, please write it down for them, where, when. It really helps. Try not to be cavalier, dirty screen, those kinds of languages. It really helps by, using more appropriate language with these folks. Look, fair and realistic expectations. These are chronic illnesses, and they're going to be over long periods of time. As Dr. Vincent said, there's really no cure, but there's great treatment, but there's going to be setbacks, particularly for the population with co-occurring. You're going to find them use again, unfortunately. And we're gonna just have to keep working to get him into recovery. It was interesting, one of the slides Dr. Vincent showed, it talked about, the different principles of care. And the last principle on that list, I think may be one of the most important, and that's optimism. And it's important that you show optimism for the individual that you're trying to help. That, hey, we're gonna help you get through this. You don't have to be sick forever. We can get you in recovery. We can help you get housing. We can help you this and that, and we wanna help you. And if you help yourself, we're gonna work with you to get this done. And so you have to believe in the capacity to change. It's important we work with our service providers. We have a managing entity system in Florida, so we've developed a very important relationship with them. We also have a homeless trust in Miami. We're the only, until recently, county in the U.S. that has a dedicated tax for homelessness. So yes, it has helped us tremendously. So come to Miami and drink and eat a lot, just don't drive. But we have a penny sales tax on food and beverage that goes to a homeless trust, and it's enabled us to reduce homelessness from 8,000 to 1,000. And so these are things that really help, and we make sure that we have access to some of that money to find housing for this population.
This is a mental health court check-in for Ms. Smith. She has participated in mental health court for about 2 months. She was referred to the court due to misdemeanor charges of endangering the life of a child and possession of controlled substances. She left her 6-year-old and 4-year-old children unattended after she put them to bed and went next door to buy some blunts. Her Axis 1 diagnosis is depression.
We're here today for an update from Ms. Smith, am I right? Can I have your appearances, please, counsel?
Wayne McKenzie for the state.
Joyce Kendrick for the defendant.
Cynthia Kimmelman DeVries, case manager.
All right, so how's she doing?
Tanya was doing really, really well. She was attending all of her treatment sessions. She was going to the court's workforce development program, and she was even getting along really well with all of the other women her age in treatment. However, the last couple of weeks have been of concern. She did not attend any treatment sessions this week or last week. And she was supposed to go with the treatment program to refill her prescription and did not.
Are you aware of this, Ms. Kendrick?
Yes, I am, Your Honor.
So what happened?
So, I ran out of my medication. My meds were all gone. And, my car broke down. And I had no money on me, you know. So I didn't have a way of getting around. I mean, I couldn't, get around to get my meds. And the pharmacy is right. It's far. It's not, it's not close to where I live. My daughter got real ill. She was so sick. There was nobody to watch her. So, I had nowhere going to get my meds filled, and I didn't have the money to do it, So I just couldn't get my meds.
Well, look, you've been doing so well up until now, and I know you have responsibilities to your children, but I don't want to see you losing ground. I mean, this is an alternative to incarceration program, and the alternative to incarceration is you stay in your program, you stay in treatment, you take your medication, you do what you're supposed to do, otherwise it's incarceration. I mean, I don't hold the key to your jail cell, you hold the key to your own jail cell, and I don't want to see you lock it. So is there anybody that can help you with the kids if they're sick, or help you get to your program?
Nah. I don't have no ride. I don't have a car. My car is broke down. Well,
Is it fixed now, the car?
No. I mean, 'cause I had no money. I mean, you
What
know.
about a relative or a neighbor help you with childcare, help you get to your program?
I got like this one sister that live in the neighborhood. But you know, she got a lot going on. I mean, she got her own kids, and you know, she got her own life. You know what I mean? I mean, she got things to do. So I'm not gonna be asking her to take me to go handle my business. I mean, you know what I mean? You know, I'm not gonna ask her to, you know, leave her kids and be like dropping me off.
I'm sure she wouldn't want to see you in jail. Is your daughter better now? So you
Yeah, she's doing better.
So that's not a problem anymore, is that right?
No.
Okay, so I'll tell you what we'll do. I want to see you move forward and do better, so you're gonna come see me every week. You're gonna be drug tested today and drug tested frequently. You're gonna fill that prescription, and you're gonna take your medication in front of your counselor every day. Is that all right with everybody?
Yes, sir.
Sound like a good way to move forward? Can you help her get her to her program?
Absolutely.
Okay, then that's the way we'll go. Is that all right with you?
Yeah.
You still want to be here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then that's the way we'll move forward. Is that all right with everybody?
Yes, sir.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the nice Judge Demi. Right, I think we all could agree his tone was great, mixed, but there's a couple things I think he did that I don't necessarily would have done. What one thing do you think he may have made more difficult based upon what she told her? Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Being that she is already having troubles with transportation, her coming weekly, that's going to cause even more stress and even more anxiety.
And chances of not coming and getting a warrant. Exactly. So she also indicated she has a problem getting her medication. So one of the things that we've arranged, because the judge mentioned earlier how amazed and excited she is that all these people come to our meetings. Our meetings got so big, we've had to break them up. But we worked out a thing with a local pharmacy. And so what we do is we have the medication in court now. And we have it all arranged, and so when they come to court, they can pick up their medication. But I absolutely agree with that. I mean, there are other issues here. What are the other issues aside from mental health that are making it difficult for her? Child care, economic issues. And so having her come on a regular basis without transportation is also a setup. So unless there's a peer, and what my county did is, it's a huge county, they're bigger than like 6 states or something. They have a fleet of cars. So we got the county to give us a car, and my peers actually drive the individuals coming through our program back and forth, and it really helps, them get to court and do what they need to do. But we try, unless there's really critical reason, not to have people come as often as every week, depending on what's going on. All right? Any other comments or questions or ideas on that video? All right, so we handed out, Judge Goss brought these today. This is the sequential intercept model. I don't 100% agree with this model. I think there should be another 0. I think the first 0 should be the pediatricians and the schools. I really think that we should be attacking this problem earlier. We should be screening for trauma at a very early age. Every pediatrician should be screening kids for trauma at a very young age. Probably having the parent not in the room with the child when they're doing an assessment, so they can get an honest answer from the child. And if there's an indication that there's some kind of abuse going on at home, then the doctor knows what to do, and they should be calling the other authorities to do that. We need to be training our teachers. So when you do these summits, again, I mentioned earlier, please bring someone from the AMA, from the Pediatric Society, and someone from your school board. And how do we train teachers to identify kids that are showing signs and symptoms? I think if we did a lot more of that, we wouldn't have what we have in our court system. But the rest of it is, I totally agree, and what this does is it helps us figure out how to attack the problem from many different strategies. So it then talks about law enforcement not making arrests. It then talks about initial detention and when they come to courts. And everybody plays a role in this. And when you do a mapping, this is what they use, the SIM or the sequential intercept model, to figure out where the gaps are in your system. And it's a wonderful model to be able to do this, and it's very helpful to figure out what you should and still need to do. And you know, there's going to be things that come out of this that you just don't have the capacity to do. But it's okay. You still want to start, you want to do what you can do, and what you'll find, and as that other judge mentioned, you have the county involved. They're willing to make some investments if it's going to save them money on the other side. And so you can probably work with your county. You know, you tell your county, look, if I let this guy out, he's coming right back. He's been sitting for an unbelievable amount of time. Let's figure out some transportation for him. Let's figure out where he can go. You know, spend a little money. Let's work with the hospital, probably pay for it to keep him out of the ER anyway, to set up a telepsychiatry program. They're little things. They're not that expensive. Maybe you can just get a peer. I mean, that could help someone navigate a system which is very inexpensive, and it can make a big deal difference. And as it becomes organic, you know, I do a lecture called Build It and They Will Come. And the reality is, if you just start, you are amazed how many people realize what a big problem this is. They just don't know who to go to help get it fixed. You get to be that nucleus, and the thing starts to take off. You know, we do a lot, but it's 19 years we've been doing it. And as my friend from Texas said, you know, we're a 19-year overnight success. It takes time sometimes, and you know, you build up to it, and it grows, and as you fix one thing, you find something else, and then you fix the next thing, and you know, the building that we're building is the ultimate for us, because we realize after everything we've done, we've probably addressed about 80% of the problem, but the 20% that's left, no one in the United States has the capacity for the most acutely ill population that keeps recycling. Nobody. And so we think this will be a model. We're going to figure out how to get it paid for once we open it up. And then we'll be able to show other communities what you can do, and you can have smaller pieces of it, but there are ways to keep building and fixing. We talked about mental health courts. You know, they're not just mental health courts. Look at diversion programs. I'm a big believer, if you just set up a mental health court in your community, they're going to come. And you're going to have too many people. And so the key is to try to build a bigger system around it to avoid the flow in, and when they come in, get them out. And if you're going to have the mental health court do what you're doing in Georgia, to focus on the higher need, high risk individuals. This just, reemphasizes some of the other issues we've talked about. HIPAA. There's a lot of mention about HIPAA today. HIPAA generally does not apply to law enforcement or the courts. Now, we can't share somebody's health care information with the whole public, but we can share information that comes into the court system. Remember, HIPAA was first passed not as a way to stop the sharing of data, but to show us how to use and share data. And what's happened is it's become, unfortunately, a sword unnecessarily, and I don't want to offend any providers if they're here, but I find a lot of our providers don't want to share information because they don't really like the accountability. And so there's other issues involved, but HIPAA is not nearly the problem people make it out to be, okay? I will tell you this, there has not been one criminal prosecution on a HIPAA violation in the United States ever, okay? So, the courts aren't running out to get us on a HIPAA violation. Okay, you have to really be intentionally, ridiculous on why you're sharing that information to have a problem. And we're not. We're sharing it the right way. And this is the other part about HIPAA. It can be waived. So every single person that comes into our program, the first thing we do is we explain to them what we're doing, and we have them sign a waiver to allow us to share the information. It eliminates any HIPAA issue you might have, and a CFR 42, or is it 41 or 42? 42 issue with substance abuse data. So just have them sign a waiver. It's not a big deal. We were setting up a really interesting system in Miami to see if we could use predictive analytics and behavioral health and The providers threw up HIPAA, they couldn't participate, and after God knows how much we spent on lawyers to figure out how we could get around HIPAA, finally somebody said, well, can't we just have the individual sign a waiver? Yes, 100%, everyone signs the waiver. It's not a big deal, they want to get better, okay? These are just some tools on pretrial release decisions. One of the other documents we handed out that's in your packet is this wonderful piece. This is a practical considerations related to release and sentencing of defendants who have behavioral health needs. This is in your packet. This is another document I would recommend. One page, two-sided, laminated, leaving on the bench. Very helpful. Gives you ideas on what you can and should do in terms of releasing. All right, this is an impossible chart to go through, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But it kind of points out to the chart that the other judge put up. The system's fragmented and complicated, and these go through a lot of options, but the illnesses are much more complicated than the solutions. It's about setting up warm handoffs, making sure people get to what they need, getting them decent care, and helping them recover. Is this tool in their toolbox as well that goes through the community resources? Okay, the other thing that we handed out that's in your package, which I find really, really helpful, it's a community resource tool. So if you're going to do some kind of summit, you're going to bring everybody together, one of the exercises that we recommend you doing is actually going through, and it lists, it's kind of hard to see up there because it's pretty teeny, but it lists all the different types of resources that would be helpful for you to be able to carry out some type of diversion. And it's a really useful tool for you to figure out, do I have this, do I don't have it, how do I get it? And that tool is also in your information. This just talks about the types of services. It's a similar kind of tool that we give you. What kind of mental health treatment's available, substance abuse. You want to make sure it's co-occurring treatment. One of the charts that Dr. Vincent showed you is only about 6%. This is nationwide. And in states like Florida and Georgia, it's probably even worse. Only about 6% of providers in the community provide both mental health and substance use services. And so you really need to work on them to make sure they're providing the right types of services. Georgia has the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. There's a website that you can go to. I cannot attest how good or bad it is. So hopefully it's a good tool for you, and it's something that could be very helpful for you to get more information about what's going on in your community. They also have it for substance use. A lot of states are setting up what we call centers of excellence. We have one basically through the University of South Florida. Remember, that's the one in West Florida. But it's really a good institute. And what it does, and it's something to maybe talk to the legislature about, they're not very expensive. I think most of them only cost a couple $100,000 a year. They usually get embedded at a local university. And what they do is they can collect data for you, but more importantly, they help you keep up, and the courts keep up with new best practices as they come out. And so as things change, we want to be informed about that. And we do it through our website, through the Judges Psychiatric Leadership Initiative, but it'd also be nice to be able to have an institute that could actually help initiate trainings as things come out for the judiciary so you all can stay current. The 21st Century Cures Act was a bill passed by Congress about a year and a half ago. It's actually a very, very good piece of legislation. It puts a lot more money into mental health and substance abuse. There's a lot more grants out there through the Justice Department and through SAMHSA. You want to keep an eye on those, work with your local government to find out what they are and apply. But they're very, very helpful. I will tell you this. The best way to get a grant is to have a sustainability piece of it. And the way that we've been so successful, I now have a staff of 25 people that work for me in the court. I know I pinch myself and I try not to tell too many people in part of that. But we do it through all kinds of funding ways. And we started by getting grants. And we went to the county and said, would you sustain this grant after it runs out? And they said, if you can show us that it's actually saving us money And, you know, reducing our jail population, yes. And so they do. So the county gives us a lot of money for staff. We get state dollars as well, and we get federal dollars. And we mix and match all of those different components, and that includes 8 of our peers, and it includes our staff that work in all the courts to help, you know, facilitate all that we're doing. It takes staff to help make all this work. And so one way to do that is applying for grants, and the 21st Century Cures Act has some money. We mentioned this earlier, the county commissioners were here. This is part of the Stepping Up initiative. You can Google that. You can see there's some really wonderful information about that. Real quickly, competency. We talked a little bit about this. There are about 60,000 competency evaluations each year. About 20% of them, the individuals actually found incompetent to proceed, so it's a pretty low number. It's outrageously expensive. Which was mentioned by the judge in Savannah, it lengthens the stay for the individual. And on a misdemeanor, what happens is they're automatically going to get credit for time served by the time they come out. So nothing has been accomplished, nothing. And so you really, I would encourage you, this is a way to get favor by your state, is to reduce those costs by diverting people and keeping them out of the competency system entirely if you can. This is the case I mentioned earlier. This is the True Blood case. It's out of Washington State, written by the chief judge. It is now the law of the land. When I heard some of the numbers before, you're out of compliance. It's probably unconstitutional by letting people sit. Trust me, there's an ACLU everywhere, and they're going to find out at some point, and they're going to sue, and it's going to cost the state a lot more money to get sued than to fix it ahead of time. So this is something that I would encourage you to talk to your legislators about and the governor, because this gives you some leverage with them on why they should give you more money before they get sued and they have to spend a lot more money for really bad outcomes. I also want to mention the American Bar Association recently updated the criminal justice mental health standards. These are really important, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. And while they're not the law, they are our standards, and they're phenomenal. And we actually added an entire new section 1, which first recognizes that people with mental illnesses have special needs, and that we need to be working with our community providers to develop valid and reliable screening, assessment, diversion, and intervention strategies. This is now the standard of what we should be doing. So I give you a lot of credit for A, what you're already doing, and B, learning more about it. It then even has a section for judges and prosecutors. It talks about how we should be looking at alternatives to incarceration, how we should be using our moral authority, which all 3 judges from Georgia talked about, how we're able to facilitate these meetings. That's exactly what the standards call for. And it talks to make sure that we're working and relying on evidence-based practices if they exist, and using valid and reliable appraisals and risk assessment, which goes to the R&R that we talked about before. And you're also accomplishing one of the other standards, which talks about the need for judges to be educated in this arena, which we're doing today, as well as prosecutors. The other big movement that's going on in the country for judges is what we call procedural justice. I think this is an arena that fits entirely within that, and that looks to go beyond the individual practice and to focus on respect and fairness. And I don't think there's anything more respectful or more fair than to start to treat people with mental illnesses in a manner that's consistent with their illness, and stop making things worse by not understanding. And then I'm going to finish up, I think, with this.
Hands down, listen out.
Gently, they're guided to glide into yoga positions.
Down like that.
Inmates suffering from mental illnesses every week now immersed in lessons of mindful meditation. Teacher Lawrence Huff urges them to find an inner sanctuary of calm and confidence.
That's it. Yeah, because I see them all as, souls, just like me, They just had some bad strokes of luck, and so they ended up this way.
It's a part of a most dramatic departure from how mentally ill inmates were once housed and treated on the notorious forgotten floor of the Miami-Dade jail, the ninth floor.
There's one on the
floor underneath the bunk, and one or two standing around waiting for their turn to sleep.
Inmates holed up, often naked, forced to sleep on the floor in freezing, putrid-smelling cells designed for one.
You can't treat human beings this way.
Inmate after inmate tried to remind us.
The water's not working. The water's not working. He's drinking the sewer water. Take soda water out of the gutter.
We had stepped into a jail that had morphed into the largest de facto psychiatric ward in the state, with just one psychiatrist on staff who shocked our community and the nation, sharing this.
You would think that in 2006, we would treat people with chronic mental illness in a much better, more humane manner. But unfortunately, we're reverting back to how it was in the 16 and 1700s, which is terrible. It's morally incomprehensible.
Let's go in and take a look. In the 18 months since the Forgotten Floor was shuttered, a new generation of inmates is now housed in a $2.5 million retrofit of the 4th floor of the Turner Guilford Knight Correctional Center, a literal world away from the nightmare Judge Steve Leifman turned to us to capture.
Your first Forgotten Floor led to a grand jury report. It helped us, it was an eye-opener for the entire community. It opened a window to what needed to be done.
Do you feel safe in here? What do you see when you walk in there?
Well, number one, there's only one person. There's not 4 or 5 in a cell for one.
Number 2, there's no longer just one psychiatrist.
It's night and day. I mean, you have 13 psychiatrists working on these floors now. People are getting attention. They're not stuck in there, basically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In this case, people are actually getting treated. They have therapy classes. They see one-on-one doctors here and therapists. You saw they have an outdoor area, like I was playing basketball. It's an open space. It doesn't smell. It's not freezing. It's the way it's supposed to be.
Psychiatrist Patricia Hongiva of the Jackson Health Services team.
I see them as patients, no matter where they are. So I see that they're individuals that are suffering from mental illness and that we have to take care of them as a whole. Medical, emotional, well-being.
There are automated electronic checks and balances. All meds, feedings, visits by doctors and correctional staff, including suicide watch, are logged and tracked on iPads.
Well, see, the important thing to remember, Michelle, that these individuals can be a member of our family, so we want to make this environment as safe and humane as possible.
Daniel Jr., Interim Director, Miami-Dade Corrections and Rehabilitation. In our series of reports, we exposed how on the 9th floor, neither corrections nor medical staff could call out directly to 911 when an inmate suffered a medical emergency. Life and death minutes could be lost in a maze of bureaucratic phone calls. But now,
if I need to call 911, can I dial out
You
directly?
can dial 911 directly from any unit within our system.
That's a big difference.
That's a big difference.
You brought it to light. It was beyond a hometown horror. And what you have now is all about possibilities that has become a national model.
Miami-Dade Commissioner Sally Heyman, who following our reports, fueled a campaign for change.
And look at how incredible the change is.
How are you feeling today? Fixtures have been changed. For the acute mentally ill, no more steel bunk beds from which an inmate like William Weaver could jump from, and did. He ended up a quadriplegic. His father, William Weaver Sr.
Do you think anything has come from what the incident of what your son went through?
Nothing. Nothing's changed. Do I think something could change? I don't know. I don't know. It's time. It's time. Something changed. But I don't know if it ever will.
Mr. Weaver, he says, I don't think it will ever change. And he starts to cry. Things do change. And we closed that 9th floor. Michelle Gillen and CBS 4 have made a remarkable difference, not just in the lives of these individuals, and not just in getting them in a better place that they should be, but for helping change the entire system. you made them human again, and it helped destigmatize the problem.
And on this day, female inmates were all smiles upon receiving new yoga mats donated by South Florida's yoga community. Behind bars, men and women who may live in anonymity, but these days seem quite aware they are not forgotten.
It took us 11 years to get the media back into the jail after that first video. I can imagine why. Somehow that video made it to the Justice Department, who sued us. I won't say how it got to the Justice Department. But it really strengthened our hand. We went from one psychiatrist for 7,400 inmates to 13 full-time and 7 part-time for 4,000 inmates. So things do change, and we can make a significant difference. If you're interested in getting involved in the Judicial Psychiatric Partnership, you should have that information in your package. If you don't, this is the website for it. You can just Google Council State Government, justicecenter.org, and you can sign up and get the monthly newsletters. If you did not, we're missing one book still. If it's going around, please pass it up. Okay? We may have to have a screening on the way out. Yes. Is it mine?
Judge, you were talking about how Intercept 00 should be added?
Yes.
Well, there's a vehicle, I think, within state law that would allow for us to do that in Georgia. And it's OCGA 20-2-690.2. 20-2-690.2. And what it's called, it's the County Student Attendance and School Climate Committee. Representatives, recommendation, written protocol reports. And I know the first thing that you're thinking about is, what the heck is that? Well, the Chief Judge of the Superior Court appoints this committee. And this is the purpose. It says the Chief Judge of the Superior Court of each county shall establish a student attendance and school climate committee for such county. The purpose of the committee shall be to ensure coordination and cooperation among officials, agencies, programs involved in compulsory attendance issues, to reduce the number of unexcused absences from school, to increase the percentage of students present to take tests which are required to be administered under the laws of the state, and to improve the school climate in each school. The Chief Judge is responsible for ensuring that all members of the committee are notified of their responsibility to the committee, and shall call the first meeting of the committee in each county. The committee shall elect a chairperson and may elect other officers. Let me tell you what happened when I went to my first meeting as a Chief Judge in Henry County. We had a police officer, someone, high-ranking member of the local police department. We had a high-ranking member of the sheriff's department. We, of course, had high-ranking members of the school board. We had counselors. We had judges. We had prosecutors. We had defense attorneys. I thought that was all we really need. That's everybody that we need to do what you're talking about doing.
And, it also points out that there's often so many silos, and the fact that you actually have some legislation to kind of force that together and make sure that early group is involved, you can make a significant difference. So, there's a lot of laws on the books, a lot of us never know about, but this is one that probably could be very effective. And so I would recommend that if you're putting together a summit, that you make sure that you utilize this law and make sure all the right people are at the table. So thank you for that. And thank you for the return of the last book. So we're all good on that. You are very honest with the judges.
My name is Holly Lindy. I'm with the Carlson Institute of Government. I actually wanted to let you all know that myself and 4 or 5 of my colleagues will actually be trained by PRA in delivering the mapping exercise for communities throughout Georgia in June. So coming in July, we will be able to deliver that, and we will deliver that for free. It's a day to day and a half workshop depending on your needs, so please let me know if you would be interested.
And that's a big deal. PRA, who's wonderful, charges about $15,000 per mapping. Okay, so the state's probably giving them one big fee, and then they'll go out and teach the state. But when you're ready to get involved, I would call them first, have your summit, and part of the summit is to do the mapping. and figure out where the gaps are, and then you begin a plan. One thing, and I was so impressed with the work that they're actually doing, because you want to put your plan in writing. And I would also recommend, when you're starting maybe for future, is you have a collaborative agreement or a memorandum of understanding, and I would require all the different stakeholders to sign it as a way to make sure that it actually gets implemented. With the start date, we just picked an arbitrary date and started, just have to start. So I want to, any other questions? Comments? Well, I want to thank all of you so much. You've been an amazing group. I'm so impressed with what's going on. I want to thank Judge Goss, Judge Amaro, Dr. Vincent, and Deidre for helping organize all this and all the wonderful work you're doing. Thank you all very, very much, and good luck.